Hi, everyone. My name is Kenji Maeda. I am the Executive Director of the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. Thank you so much for coming tonight and being here to in our third Questions I'm Asking Myself webinar series. We do have our guests Mariam and Gavin here as well. I'm going to do just a couple quick housekeeping and things to welcome you all. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that at GVPTA, we are on the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, something that is very important to us as an organization and very important to me as an individual as well, as I continue to think about and learn about my own Indigenous backgrounds of my family heritage in Okinawa as an Okinawan Canadian. And so it's something that for us as an organization with GVPTA, we think about it in terms of how we program, how we do any of our activities, and how we engage with the community at large as well. So the Questions I'm Asking Myself series is something that we started a few months ago, really kind of centering on this idea that we are curious beings. I'm a curious being, and there are a lot of things that I do think about, and as talking to other folks within the community, the things that I'm interested in are the conversations we often have when we meet up for coffee or meet up for a drink. Less so in person now, but it's the same ideas that we have a lot of things going on in our minds, and all we want to do, and some of the things that we want to talk through are curiosities. And so that's kind of the impetus of what the questions series is looking to explore. So we've done 2 webinars already. You can watch them or listen to them as recordings. This one will also be recorded as well. A couple of things to note is that if you do require captioning, all you have to do is click on the custom live streaming service, which is at the top of your Zoom screen. And then it's going to say view stream on custom live streaming service. It'll open one of your browser windows, and you can actually read the captioning and the transcription live. So you can use that if you want to. We are not going to be really taking questions as part of this webinar. So our focus is really going to be having this conversation kind of like in a fishbowl. Although you can pose questions in the Q&A window, I can't promise that we're going to get to them, because it's not really a formalized expert panel kind of response type of format here. But if you want to engage with folks who else is in the room, then you're welcome to use the chat window, or if you have any technical difficulties, Amanda is keeping an eye on that, so she can respond to you there as well. So I'm going to invite Gavin and Mariam to come and turn on their videos and microphones. And I should also mention for myself, my pronouns are he and him, so I want to acknowledge that as well. So Mariam and Gavin. So Gavin, do you want to go first? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Gavan Cheema. I'm working as a theater creator. I work as a director, producer, writer. I'm also recently an educator, so I'm working with kids for the first time, which is super exciting. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Mariam?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mariam Berry. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Norway and the Gambia. That's something that's always really important for me to acknowledge my ancestry and also how I came here. So I moved to Canada about 6 years ago now from living abroad. And it's been like a real joy and gift of my life to be here and to be creating as an artist. I am an actor, a writer, a director, also an emerging filmmaker. I work with Real Youth, and I'm also a film editor and youth arts facilitator with them. So I feel really like multimedia. I feel like that's kind of who I am. Like, I love playing and dabbling around in different mediums. And I feel like the most creative when I'm actually exploring a new kind of art than my usual practice, which is in theater.
Great. So the three of us, we kind of put some questions together and we passed it through email. Which one do you want to go tackle first? Do you want to do the Miriam's second question in that email?
Sure. Do we want it?
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah,
why don't we start with that? Okay. So do you want to pose the question and then and tell us a little bit about why that question, like where did that come from and what you're thinking?
Okay, so the question that I'm kind of asking myself, or that I have been asking myself lately, specifically since kind of COVID-19 happened and the pandemic was declared, was what makes my creativity come alive? I have it written here. What's my relationship to my creativity, and how do I keep play and wonder at the forefront of my work? Now, this is something that I started thinking about because, strangely enough, I actually found that I feel more creative. This is going to sound messed up, but I do feel more creative in this pandemic, and I'm interested in why. And I think it has to do with a couple different things. And I think one was like in March, when everything slowed down, everyone was forced to just do less. And like, because of that, I had to find things to do around the house, right? And it was interesting to see what I was like naturally drawn towards. And I found that what I was naturally drawn towards was obviously like art making, but it was also different kinds of art that I haven't really been doing since I was a kid. So like dancing, painting, poetry. And now my relationship to what I was making was different, because now I was doing it for play or for exploration, and it wasn't as like industry specific, or like I'm doing this for like a product, or because I've been hired to do this and they want this kind of messaging. And it feels like a much more like healthier way to approach your creativity. And it was such a reminder that like my art is supposed to be for me, and all I have to do is just like allow and be receptive to like whatever the impulse is, and to really just tell my story with like the fullness of my heart. And I think sometimes that can get clouded or distorted in the community, and also like as a professional theater maker or just a professional artist in general, when you're navigating basically like the capitalist system and all the things that they need from you. That like really that break has really helped me create a much more like healthier relationship with what I'm making. So it's like, it's fun again, you know, and it's like, it's supposed to be fun. It's called a play, you know, but it's like, I don't know why like that was lost, but I'm so happy that it's like, I'm finding that again. And I'm also understanding more about like what actually, where my creativity sits in me. And I'm like, oh, it sits a lot in my body. When I'm actually in motion, when I'm like dancing or et cetera, that's where like I get like a vision or an idea or a spark about what I should make. So it's been nice to like get to know those things about me.
Can I ask a clarifying thing? So in terms of like being a multidisciplinary artist, did you find that because you got to play more for yourself, that the intersections between the art forms became stronger or more defined through this process?
I would say so. I think that it's like, I have also like this deep-seated belief that like all creativity is actually interconnected. And I think that also comes with like my like personal history also within like the African diaspora, where it's like traditionally like on the continent, like if you're a musician, you're also a dancer, you're also a storyteller, like everything is connected, and it's all part of like one culture and one mode of expression that just like that kind of funnels out in different ways. So I think to me, being able to, let's say, paint a little bit, and as I'm painting, I'm hearing a song, or I'm, you know, or like these words come to me, I was like, I'm finding that intersection, I think, like you said as well, just by exploring something that I wouldn't usually do when I'm like full on just being like a theater artist or in the film industry.
Gavin, what about for you in terms of that question around creativity?
Yeah, I think kind of just chiming in based on what Mariam was talking about, I think for me, like the start of the pandemic, yes, like I completely agree. Like I was forced to slow down, and like it was the simple things that made a big impact. Like I unpacked for the first time in a really long time, and I didn't even realize, I was like, I've been on the go for so long, but I don't actually know where I'm going. I'm like, where have I been going? Like, I've been, you know, working on this project and there, and like, I haven't actually felt grounded in a really long time. And I don't think I realized that until I was forced to stop and just take a second. And I, you know, like the simple things, you look around and you're like, I haven't unpacked my room. Like, I haven't done, you know, basic things around the house that I've like been meaning to do for so long. And then when I started to do that, I think, yeah, like my creativity definitely started to come alive, because it was like, oh, like I just found this memory box from when I was like 15, and you start going through it and you like read a poem that you wrote, and, you know, and you're just reminded of like why you do it. And I think that was a big thing for me. And then it just kind of like turned into a rabbit hole from there, because it was like, what else am I going to do? I might as well just go through like all of my journals from like 2005 to now, which I did, and it was a hilarious activity. But yeah, I think that's kind of, that was my way of keeping my creativity alive in a time where I felt so, you know, isolated, because I was in Surrey, I was at my parents' house, and, you know, I can't see my friends, I can't go see my community like everybody else. But I think I saw myself in a new way in a lot of ways, because it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember where I come from. I think that was a big thing for me, and I made a lot of changes, I think, as a result of that. I talked to the people I was working with and like kept them connected with where I was at. And, you know, coming slowly as things are starting to open up again, I feel like I'm a lot more intentional with like the projects I'm choosing to work on, the people, you know, I want to be around. And I think that's really important. Yeah, to, you know, give yourself space to actually do the things that you want to do and do them well, so you can have space for play and wonder. Because if you're doing 5 projects at one time, you're going to lose the play and the wonder, because you're going to want to get that product out so they'll pay you. So I think it's easy to kind of, especially when you're an emerging artist, to just get swept up in that. And, you know, there was a lot of really hard things that came from the pandemic, and, you know, I think a lot of us are still dealing with. But one thing I really appreciated about it, especially at the start, was just how much reflection that it allowed.
Mm-hmm. And I think you said some like really true things just now as well, in terms of like your bedroom or your space. Like, all it is new. Don't be fooled.
I built that shelf during the pandemic, both of those.
You know what I mean? It was not looking like this before, let me tell you. But actually taking care of your space, it's like you're taking care of like your internal world, I find. And like, I even like when I'm thinking back to like high school, I always used to tell myself that like, I know that when I'm wilding out is when my room is super messy. That it's like a reflection of actually how I'm doing, because I just don't have time to do these things that like really matter. But even me, like I redecorated this entire house. I got like plants everywhere now, also in my room. So when I wake up, it's like I feel inspired because I'm surrounded by things that like I love and that give me joy. And like these are the small things that like nobody tells you, but they're so important. And it's not just self-care, because it also relates to your creativity as an artist. So I don't know, maybe it's like creativity care, something like that. But I definitely hear what you're saying, Gavin. I feel like I was on the same kind of level.
There are just so many things going in my head right now. I mean, like the journaling thing. I also went back and read through a bunch of old journals, and it was a very sad time. I was like just reading. I was very emo. I was like, all these things were coming into play, and then I was telling my partner, like, do you want me to read one of my old journal entries, just because that way you'll know me from 15, 20 years ago. Anyway, we'll make it a night of it or something. But the other thing, definitely, like, it's interesting because when the pandemic hit, things got really busy for me, but it became much more focused. So it allowed me, in some ways, even though it was busy, it allowed me to kind of really hone in on what I needed to do. So a lot of other things had to fall off as non-priorities during, like, especially April April-ish. And I think for me, a lot of the things around being a creative person, I mean, I am an artist as well with that background, but a lot of the things that I think about is administrative creativity. I don't know. I think outside of the box around those kinds of things, which is maybe seen as not seen in the same way, actually. The creative administrators versus a creative artist. And I feel like I do have a little bit of both of those elements, but it definitely is, I don't know, my room is still a mess. Like, my living room is still a mess. My office is still a mess, but I guess that was just how I had to navigate the last little while. I will say though, the one thing that it made me realize is it did really make me miss of course my family, but just being in Japan. So I try and go to Japan like once a year or two. Of course, can't go this year, but even if I wasn't planning to go to Japan this year, there was a part of me that still felt and was yearning for going back there for some reason. And it's not necessary, maybe it's the homesickness element of it, or it's I've been noticing that I've been listening to and watching more culturally specific Okinawan music and Okinawan kind of videos. And I didn't really think about it until the two of you were talking about that in terms of connecting and the creativity piece. But I've been yearning that for the last little while. I don't know, that's been a thing.
I think that's interesting because it's been the same for me, but I felt like the build up to that was happening even before COVID, because it's like I was in the Gambia over Christmas like last year, and it'd been like 3 years since I've been there, and that's where like my family on my dad's side lives. And then really during this pandemic and like when things slowed down, and like Gava had that same thing, like, okay, what am I actually doing? What's the goal? Like, what's my dream life? And like, how am I making steps to make that happen? And where am I actually already kind of living the dream life? It maybe looks a little different, got different clothes on, but it's the same. It's like, it's still aligned with what I'm trying to do. And that really also made me think that like, whoa, I miss home. And like, I feel this really calling that's like really deep in my heart to go back to the Gambia. And I've been feeling that for a while. I would love to just spend like a year at home surrounded by like family and community and culture. And I think specifically in this context of like everything that's going on, from the like pandemic to like Black Lives Matter and all of that, it's like I'm really feeling that need of like, I just want to be surrounded by people who love me and people who know me. And it's like Gavin's also said, like remembering where you come from. And because I'm like biracial and also like kind of multicultural, there's like so many different points of home for me, and all of them matter to me. So I'm always like in this different kind of journey where it's like, how do I bring it all into one and integrate all of it? And I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like. But I think, yeah, like just watching like those specific shows or like cooking those recipes. Like I have like, you can't see it, but there's like a banana tree that I bought. These things grow huge, but it's like right in front of me. So when I'm working, like I look at it and it just reminds me of like things that like take me home, makes me feel safe and comforted and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely resonates with me too. Like I haven't spent this much time like with my parents probably since I was in high school. Like I can't ever remember a time aside from being a teenager that I've spent this much time with them. But it's so different this time around because I'm like, we're all adults. So I can actually like, build a relationship with my parents where I get to know them as people. Because I don't think, before this pandemic that I had the opportunity necessarily to get to know them as the people that they are. And like, I spent so much time with my mom and like cooking with her because I'm like, how have we never done this? I was like, I don't know how to make our food. And like, I eat it all the time. And so just kind of, connecting like with my family and just like, I guess an extension, like with my culture in that way, the pandemic just gave so much space for me to do that. Like I love Indian food, and I'm like, I don't know how to make it, and like, how do I live my entire adult life without learning this basic skill? Yeah, so small things like that. Mm-hmm.
Do you have recipes to share? I'm getting hungry now just thinking about it.
Yes, because I remember you did that samosas like delivery thing, which was so
I know,
awesome.
yeah, because I was like, okay, well now I'm making all this food and learning how to make it, so I need to share it with my people. So I was doing deliveries all over East Van, which
Yeah,
was
you missed out, Kenji.
Oh my gosh. Let's do it now. We need to have a
yeah,
different, like a different webinar, a cooking webinar,
I
artists
know,
who
right?
cook webinar.
Yes, yes. I'd watch for real.
Oh my God. Should we move on to Gavin? Do you want to do your
Oh, yeah.
question?
Yeah, so I've been asking myself some pretty deep questions, mostly because I've been working a lot with youth over the last month or so. So one of the questions I've been asking myself is, in an increasingly polarizing world, how can theater keep us grounded? Yeah, so for me, like, that question kind of came from, I mean, I work for Theater Conspiracy, so a lot of the work that the company has been doing till now and the work that I've been interested in, why I chose to work with this company, um, is because I feel like they're unpacking, you know, current events or like things that are happening all around us in a way that's really engaging. And for me, like, you know, like the first time I experienced one of their shows, like I felt grounded in the information rather than feeling overwhelmed with the information. So yeah, so that's what I've been thinking a lot about as like a theater creator, and also as like an emerging theater leader, where I'm like, how can we create a space where people come to our shows and they, regardless of the content that's explored, they get a sense of grounding and they feel connected to something beyond themselves. Because I think one thing, you know, when we're thinking about like this digital world that we're now existing in, where things are catered to your specific needs and like your views and who you are as a person, like you forget that there's all these other people around you that have all these different views, and you kind of just get sunk in your silo. And I think theater is a unique thing when we're allowed to do it again in its full form, because you're forced outside of that silo. You're forced into a space with other people experiencing something that's alive.
Are, is that the sense in terms of like that is the tool for grounding, is like being in the space with other people? Is that, or are there other parts of theater that help ground people?
I think, yes, being in the space with other people, and then I think also choosing like the content that you're going to program, or how you're going to program it, or who the artists are going to be involved in that programming. Because there's so many, I think, elements that can pull people outside of their little bubbles, like whether it's like going to go see a show and seeing all kinds of people on stage that maybe in your isolated bubble at home you don't even see, because there's certain shows you watch on Netflix and there's certain people you're friends with on Facebook, and that's the experience that you have, or if it's a particular story. So like for me, I think it's always important for me to share stories that are personal, that come from who I am and everything that made me, because I think that's important. And I think, you know, people should be kind of exposed to all these different views and all these different people. Because to me, at least personally, like I feel like with the pandemic, especially, our world is getting more and more polarized. And I think I would like to use theater as a way to remind us that like we are all people. Like at the end of the day, like we're all human, and like there are things that can connect us even if we feel like we may be on opposite ends of a political spectrum or social spectrum or whatever it is. There are things that can connect us still as basic humans.
I Go ahead, Mariam.
Uh, yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think what's so powerful, like in general, about storytelling is that you can reflect the world and give the audience an ability to like dive into those topics or those narratives with somewhat of like a safe distance. Obviously, like if people are personally reflected in the story, they're gonna feel potentially triggered or etc. But it allows you to see the different side in a different way that it might feel a lot more vulnerable to I'm gonna just be straight up, engage like a Trump supporter, live in person. But if you can see it on stage, it puts it in a different context on it. And now you can at least have those conversations in a community or that you feel safe with, depending on who you're watching the show with, and then untangle things for yourself. And that's the way theater has been, or performance has been since the beginning of it's having a show in front of a witness and then us discussing how that relates to what's happening in the community. And I think that is so important. And I would also add on to what you said, Kenji, that I think what makes theater different than, let's say, film, right? Because film does the same, is the fact that we're live in space together. And to me, what I think is interesting between let's say a Western context versus, I'm always gonna bring this back to Africa, but let's say if we were in the Gambia, it's different because people already know everyone in the community. So when we gather, there is a different kind of familiarity about who's involved and what's going on with different people, and how these stories can potentially be resonating with different community members. Where I think here, a bit of that is lost. So we're watching more with strangers, and dissecting what it means with strangers. And I think it's still important to come together and to show up in a crowd to witness a play. But I do think there is that part missing where we're not as connected to our neighbors, for example, here, as we are back home.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Theater of the Oppressed, or Theater for Living, Headline Theater. David Diamond was doing, or continues to do it here in Vancouver and around the world, but using theater as a way to engage in dialogue, especially with folks who are not theater makers professionally, let's say, and using the body, using the text to spark the conversation. The thing I just realized is that the three of us have all worked with kids, with youth in some way. So my background in terms of working with youth was I used to work for Vancouver Coastal Health teaching sexual health education in schools. But we also used theater practice. I used my own theater practice to engage youth in conversations, facilitation skills, all those kinds of things. Is it okay? Can you share, if you're comfortable, share what kind of work you do with youth? Either both of you?
Yeah, sure. So I work with real youth. So, we all about the youth. So what we do is that we make films with young people across Canada. So that's from intergenerational documentaries to animations, short films, music videos. We also work with professional clients. And our mandate is to spark positive change and to use filmmaking as a tool. So what that means is that also working a lot with marginalized communities. So that's immigrant and refugee youth, Indigenous youth, making documentaries between youth and elders where their wisdom is preserved on film, and getting youth to connect with their elders in a different way. And usually as well about language retention in those films as well. And it's an amazing job as well to work with youth. I also still identify as a young person, but it's, I think, interesting to see even in the younger generations, what is already so normalized that we as potentially millennials or whatnot, we're really fighting for. And I think that's also so interesting to see that also young people all over are the same. You're always gonna find the same kind of personality show up, and they're all navigating the same things. Doesn't matter if it's youth in the north or in Brampton or Toronto, every young person is experiencing very similar things in terms of growing into their identity and their voice, and trying to fit in with their community, but also carving out their individuality. It's super satisfying as well to be a mentor to young people, because I totally credit who I am to some of the amazing mentors that I still have in my life, and that relationship is so important. So yeah.
What about you, Gavin?
Yeah, so I worked with worked with youth in two different capacities. So kind of during COVID, I started working for a not-for-profit called Aunt Leah's. So I was working a lot with teen moms and their babies, which is very different than what I'm doing now. I'm a high school teacher. So now I'm like working with like kids that are from grade 7. Our school starts from grade 7 to grade 11s. And I'm teaching them drama and social studies. So for me, both of them like go like this. I'm like, these are very connected. And I think it was really important for me. And this is like one of the revelations that I feel like I had over the course of the last 6 months to start connecting with youth again. Cause I found myself complaining like a lot kind of about like where we're at in our society and like, you know, like where we're at in theater and where we're at just as a larger, you know, Canadian society and North American society. And I wanted to do something that was tangible. So I kind of started to find a way that I could start teaching. Because I'm like, that's where kids are impressionable and, you know, they can grow to be more empathetic humans. Like if they have the mentors, the kind of mentors that I had, because I, as Mariam said, like attribute a lot of who I am to the high school teachers that I had, to like the early university professors that I had, and the mentors that I had even after I graduated. So I'm working with high schoolers, which is so different because they don't all want to be there when they're at that age. So trying to engage them is really, it's a fun challenge. Yeah. And I think a lot of them are kind of growing to love drama class because it's really stressful for them right now to be going to school, you know, during a pandemic. But they come to drama and I give them like 10 seconds to just scream and they love it. And they're like, okay, we can start our class now. We've just gotten to scream for like 10 seconds. And I think, you know, given the situation that we're in, it just gives them, you know, a different sense of appreciation for connecting and playing and like, you know, working with somebody that actually does what they're teaching, I think is really valuable for them. And, you know, yeah, I love working with youth. I think it's exciting and it's also important because again, like it just grounds me back into my practice and like I said earlier, like why I do what I do.
I agree. I mean, it's been a while since I've been inside in the school system, but I remember how humbling it is to be invited into the school and to talk with teenagers and all the different kinds of questions that they had. But I'm also like, it's so interesting because I know a lot of artists who are not just doing the work of art inside schools, but they're using their artistic skills to be better teachers. Like it's just how you engage with students, and it's really exciting to see artists in schools not just teaching art, and how they use those skills. Anyway, that's it just came up in terms of all the things that we're talking about, and we're all talking at some point about youth. So yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, like just adding to that, when I did my first couple of socials lectures, like I was really nervous because I'm like, all these kids are looking at me like I know everything and I know nothing. Like I know what I know and that's it. But they just look at you like you know everything. So I just started performing my lectures because they would be so engaged if I treat it as a performance. And it also gave me more confidence because I could just like take a step back from being a teacher and just perform them all the information that they need to know. And they
What
were
do you
just
mean
like,
by perform? What do you mean by perform? Are you actually doing
so
a full, like a monologue?
no, well, kind of like, you know, like I look at all the information I need to teach them. So for example, like last week, our first kind of segment, we're doing 20th century world history. So starting from like, you know, like 1850, we were looking at like, you know, for example, the scramble for Africa was one of our first units. So I like knew all the things I needed to teach them. And rather than just throwing up a PowerPoint, because they've been staring at screens for so long, I memorized all the things I needed, and I just went to the front of the class and I performed it, and it was interactive, and they got to ask questions, and they were engaged the entire time. And I felt more confident because I didn't feel like it was me, you know, Gavan, who just became a teacher, sharing all this knowledge. It felt like me as this performer trying to like get across this information.
So that was in person in school?
Yeah, our classes are all in person.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. And I think it totally makes sense as well. Like, I think as an artist or a creative person, also someone like Gav and I, who are also like young people still, it's like we have a different like sensitivity as well, I think, to like what is going on, like in terms of what are young people engaged with, and also what are some of the things that we really could have used. And I think we approach teaching maybe in like a more, I don't want to say necessarily sensitive, but like I think maybe like a more heart-driven place than I think some teachers who have been doing it for years and obviously get burnt out and all of those things. Also, I think activist always comes out. As people of color, it's also very important for young people to see people of color in teaching positions and as people that can lead, because that's really inspiring. I know as a young person as well, like why I fell in love with English and certain subjects that was as well, because they were like teachers of color that were teaching me the subject, and they could just relate to me in a different way, and they also saw me in a different way. I wasn't like as invisible in their class. So I think even that, even just our presence makes a big difference.
The thing, I agree with you there, because when I became executive director of Doxa Festival a number of years ago, that when I was looking around at the landscape of executive leadership within the Vancouver arts and culture scene, very poor in terms of the number of BIPOC folk. And Howard Jang was really the guy who existed, and he was at Arts Club at that time. So anyway, yes, I agree with you that there needs to be presence and there needs to be visibility of leaders. This kind of goes to a question around mentorship, and because this is actually, I didn't put it in an email when we were creating questions, but the question of what does mentorship look like, especially right now in the arts and culture sector. What does it look like, and what does it mean to actually be a mentor within our sector? And one of the things that I think about is that succession planning is partly this mentorship piece, and that people in positions of power, people who are in organizations, and actually even individuals within the sector who have some level of leadership or expertise or visibility as an expert, so-called in quotes, expert, that like 10% of their time should actually be dedicated towards mentorship or succession planning or something along those lines, that is not about just maintaining the status quo of who you are and what you represent in the community. And I try and like uphold that in terms of 10% of my time is going to be dedicated toward that. But I don't know, that's just it's a thing that I've been thinking about. And so I guess a question or a thing for the two of you would be, what are your thoughts? What does mentorship actually look like in the cultural sector for you?
I think it's like, so there's a lot of dimensions to like a mentor. Because when I actually think about it, like a mentor is also a person who's invested in you, and there's a just genuine organic relationship between you and this person. I think as well as an artist is someone who understands you as a creative person and understands the kind of stories that you want to tell and what your intentionality is with your work. And then someone who can coach you in terms of like how you can get more specific with your work, how can you push it to the next level, and also someone who can advocate for you as well in terms of getting you bigger contracts, or just in terms of how you're navigating yourself as an artist, like the industry side, the business side of it. Someone who's in your corner in that way. And like you said, as well, Kenji, someone who's can pave the way for a younger artist or just a different kind of artist to also share space. So that exchange of knowledge, I think is really important. And that I also believe the best mentors are actually where it's like you're both in a way like teaching each other, and it's like reciprocal. Oh my gosh, English. Reciprocal. And it should be very organic, and it's so important as well, because I think like we all need those like intergenerational relationships, period, in all like forms of our life. We need advice and coaching and someone who can guide us. And I think specifically like professionally as well, that can make a huge difference in terms of where your career is going. Someone will actually warn you too. A good mentor will warn you about like bad practices too, and what that looks like, and how you can protect yourself and even advocate for yourself as well.
Yeah, I think Mariam really hit the point home, like when you're talking about that it's a mutual relationship. Like I think for me, like the most meaningful mentorship that I've gotten has been like, you know, like a sustained mentorship, where it's like, it's not just someone that's like, you know, gonna do a mentorship with you for a year because you got a grant. So like, they're just gonna teach you how they do things. Like, yes, that's really great. And that to me is more of like a teaching role. Like you're not really invested in that particular artist's long-term you know, longevity of their career, but I think a genuine mentor is someone that's kind of actually hard to find, because it's the one that's going to commit to you as a person for a lot of years to come, and they're going to be there when you're, you know, when you don't know anything, to the point where it's like, yeah, like I actually feel like you have valuable things to say, and like this is a mutual relationship. Like you know, like you kind of talked about, it's intergenerational. And I think to my relationship with the artists that I work, again, like at Theater Conspiracy, like I've been there for so many years now, and I've never felt inferior to anybody in that room, even though I am so much younger than a lot of the people and I have a lot less experience. Like they always make me feel like, you know, my thoughts and my opinions are valid, and that if I have an idea in a room, that it's accepted, it's explored. And, you know, like I think about a lot of the relationships that I have with people at Progress Lab, and they just genuinely are interested in the work that I'm doing, and they're genuinely invested in my career as, you know, an emerging arts leader. And I think yeah, it's that just mutual trust that you can build over years and years of a mentorship and like mentee role, to the point where you're like almost at equals. Like I think that would be like the gold standard if I was ever mentoring someone, if at some point, like, you know, they succeeded and they surpassed like where I'm at in my career, like that to me would be like, yeah, like you did good.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too. It reminds me of like my work also as a facilitator, where I feel like a good mentor as well will facilitate you towards your own brilliance. It's not about saying you're doing this wrong always, and like this is the right way to do it because this is how I did it and it worked for me, so this is how you're going to pop off. It's like, no, I understanding who you are and like what you're genuinely interested in, and finding ways in which you can cultivate like your own shine for yourself. And I think as well, something that you touched on, Gavin, is that it has to do with mindset. Like the mentor should also understand that like you as like a younger person as well, you're the future. You're the future of what theater is going to look like in Vancouver, in Canada, wherever you're going to work. So of course your opinion matters. And of course what you're interested in making is valid. And it's about giving you tools of empowerment, and then also to throw in the fact that if we're thinking about all the systematic barriers that are faced on certain marginalized intersectional artists versus others, I think a good mentor also helps you navigate through that, or help you like break past that, gives you access to spaces that you might not have unless they did like throw your name out in the room.
I think this is why I really like the being in the space with like students or teacher or like the facilitation piece, because whether it's like adults or whatever age they are, it's actually just being like, you actually have the answers. You have most of the answers that you need. You just need to know what the question is. Like ultimately, that's what it is. Like figure out what the question is, and then you will figure it out. Like that's it, right?
Like I will never forget, it was such an iconic moment. It was like I went to like JIV with like a professional question or like something I was navigating. And I was like, JIV, this is how I feel. It's not fair. Like, like this and that. And like, you know, you're someone that I really look up to, and like, your work inspires me every day. And you as a person, you're just amazing. So like, what should I do? And like, he like did some magic in front of me. He like created like some kind of like mind map that he said was a, was like some sort of like technique that he had been passed down to him from another mentor as well. Whereas like we put different questions in different corners, and then he just kept asking me questions so that I could help like navigate through everything that I was feeling. And from just asking the right questions and us kind of circling it around on this paper, it's like we found out kind of like how I want to play the game or how I want to proceed. And like to me, like that was like one of the most like impactful moments ever. Like actually like just like in my theater career, in terms of having someone who's like just there to like reflect back with you and who has your back, who's supporting you, but also letting you find it yourself, but they're guiding you throughout the entire time. And I feel like that's the definition of like an amazing like mentorship. And like the way I kind of want to be in all my relationships is about supporting people so they can find it themselves, because then it's more meaningful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think like one thing that like Rumble and Conspiracy, I think, do really well when it comes to mentorship is like it's actually an open door. Like if I have a question or something comes up and like I text Tim or I just like go into Rumble's office, like they will put down what they're doing and they'll give me 100% of their attention. And in that moment, like other things, yes, may be pressing and may be important, but they are genuinely invested in kind of helping you navigate the rough patches that come when you're trying to, you know, be in all these institutional spaces as a young person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we should get rid of the word mentor and mentee. There's a certain hierarchy to it that it does make me a little bit uncomfortable, but I recognize that language is language and people use it to identify certain categories. But there is like, it does feel like mentor is up here oftentimes, but I think we're agreeing that it's actually a linear, it's a relationship.
Yeah.
It's a type of relationship.
Yeah, you're right. It does sound kind of like expert and apprentice. There's kind of that inbuilt hierarchy when we just say mentor, because I think also we think capitalism, like we think in terms of a capitalist space where they're like, oh, here's the intern and here's the exec. And it's about like breaking away from that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think one thing that like I'm trying to be more intentional of, especially with my new position at Conspiracy, is actually committing to what it means to be co-leaders and trying to unpack that and look at the hierarchy that we've existed in for so long and have normalized, and to the point where like even when we are co-leaders, like are we still following like one person's lead? Like how do we actually do this? Because I think we've been programmed for so long that you know, to kind of follow that traditional model where there's the artistic director, the executive director, and then everybody else. But it's like we don't create work in an artistic room in that way. Like when we're devising, like we figured that out. Like we've figured out how to devise a play and do it in a way that we're co-creating. So how can we do that on an institutional level? Like how can we do that with arts administration, and how can we do that with these decision-making powers that you know, like when you're looking at board of directors or how companies function, like is there a way to do it that's more egalitarian? And that's actually more, to me, reflective of how our artistic practice is.
Yeah, the I mean, this is going into like org development kind of stuff, which is I love that stuff. And looking at org charts and looking at how decisions are being made. But it's true that I mean, I see a lot more of the flexibility, the collaboration for artistic work, less so in terms of the organization, administration, that that side of our world. And it's an interesting place to and to see how co-leadership exists, or why it doesn't exist in certain organizations. I mean, we do see a lot of like general manager, artistic directors, executive director, artistic, like those kinds of those pairings, but we definitely see a lot less of the more than two collaborative leadership models within the arts and culture sector, which surprises me because the arts is actually one of the most collaborative sectors to be in. And so, but it's like shifting, it's shifting. But you know what, I think it's because artists are historically, this is my hypothesis, artists are historically seen as lesser than the administrators. I mean, I'm an administrator, so I will own up to that, but with an artistic background. But oftentimes administrators might be seen as like, we hold the institutions, and then here you go, artists. We're going to give you this. You're welcome. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's partly that. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I don't know.
It does, but then it's interesting because I guess as someone who's like multi-hyphenate, or even like Gavin, so people who would like also produce, it's like, let's not also pretend like we don't also have like a critical mind, or we understand how to navigate institutions or in granting bodies and how to fund companies or nonprofits. Like we also understand that world. So it's interesting. And Gav, I love that you're asking yourself that question though, and that these are conversations that you're having with Theater Conspiracy. I think that just speaks like volumes of the kind of values that you guys uphold and live. And it's so important, because I find that when I'm in rooms as like a producing partner, or on the admin staff in some sort of way on the producing team, it's always interesting to like see those power dynamics. Sometimes I notice that I'm like, okay, like you're the artistic director, you hold a title, but the one who's actually doing all the work and the person that you actually rely on is this person who doesn't have like that kind of prestige or that kind of payroll. So what you know, like it's just, but it's interesting to like notice those things and be like, how do we wrestle with that, and like why is there not a conversation happening, or why are we all operating under this like silent agreement that like this is how it should be?
Yeah, I think what Kenji said is really interesting, because I think the way that a lot of companies are functioning now just naturally creates a power imbalance. And I know like one of the last questions you were asking was about power, and I think it can be really intimidating, like when you're emerging, because like there's already this innate power dynamic that exists in these institutional spaces, and then you get invited and you're like, I got the golden ticket to like, work on an arts club show, or like work at Bard on the Beach, and like you're an actor, and like like you're playing your role, you're doing your part, but in essence, like it feels like the artists at a lot of times are just at mercy to whoever's in power at that time. So yeah, I'm curious as to if there's a different way to function, or if that's just the way it's always going to be. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think it necessarily has to, but I think these spaces are so big that I don't know if they've ever, functioned in any other way.
But it also kind of looping back to what we were mentioning at the very top around what COVID did was forced us to either focus or to reflect or take a step back. This is, if organizations were going to change to like radically change, this is actually the time to, like, you can actually excuse yourself as an organization to be like, no, this is it. Because when you get busy again and you're producing a lot of shows in a year, then you're going to go back to the original response, which was we're too busy to make change, or we can't pivot that fast. We all pivoted very quickly, but right. So it's interesting to, it will be interesting to see how the forced pivot of going to digital, doing a lot of these different things has actually forced organizations, staff, board, like everyone, to really rethink how fast you can make change. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah.
I was just gonna say, also for me, it's very interesting to see how committed are really these companies to the changes that they're like claiming. I think specifically for me anyways, with all this like, oh, now we're gonna support BIPOC creators, or like, oh yes, like Black lives finally matter now. Like, to me, there's such an important conversation that needs to be had in our community, where it's like, you cannot just come out here and say that you support the community now when the community has already been existing and talking to you and calling you out on so many levels in the ways in which you have not served us. Like, there's such a like need for like a reconciliation conversation about like what are some of those past like wrongs that have happened to the community before we can even move forward. So that's something that like I know me and a lot of other people in the community are still waiting for, and we'll see how people move forward. Like, we're not a trend, you know what I mean? Like, this needs to be actually like systematic change on all levels in terms of supporting people of color and ensuring our safety. Yeah.
That's definitely a big thing, and we're 2 minutes away from ending, and we're not going to go into it, but that's definitely a big thing that I've been thinking about and looking for, like grant applications around what does a model look like to actually be able to address the multi levels of these conversations. Like, it's the reporting and acknowledging, or no, it's people feeling comfortable enough to say that this is the shit that happened with this company or this person, and then it's how do you do that safely, and then what's the process for reconciling or not reconciling. And there's going to be 100 different ways that an individual wants to go about that. Sometimes they want to report and not do anything about it, and sometimes because they just want to be like, we want you to know in case 30 other people report, and then we'll see, right? But then other people want direct action, right? So all these things, and what does it actually look like in the end? And the loop back is prevention. So I think a lot of organizations have been trying to do prevention work by creating policies, but then not addressing the other pieces. But each organization has different capacity levels. So what can we do as a sector to actually support the process that is not so piecemeal based on the budget of an organization? Because literally most organizations don't have the capacity or money to invest in facilitators or invest in people who can actually hold the space effectively as well. So anyway, sorry, any last thoughts before we leave, both of you?
No, this was really great.
Yeah, I was gonna say thank you.
Thanks for having us and listening to us.
Yeah, it was super lovely.
The hour went by really fast.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for being here and being part of the webinar, and hopefully we'll have conversations some more off camera at some point. And thanks for everybody who came and attended. It's really great to see all of you. And I hope, Gavin, Mariam, I'll send you an email, and we'll be in touch. Yeah. Thank you. Have a great night. Okay. Bye.